Hello. Hi, everyone. It's Caroline here. Maybe send me some love in the chat so I can see if you're there. We're here for a Q&A today. It's hosted by underground writers, which I'm super grateful for. Every now and again, you might hear a plane in the background because I live in the flight path and I'm in the bedroom, and so some of this sound kind of filters through, but we'll, push on through that stuff. Okay, we might just wait a couple of minutes to see if we get a few more people. Or we'll wait till 3:30, hey, start time. I'm a bit of a punctual freak, so start bang on. Just let me know if you can hear me, if the sound is okay. The microphone's turned up to 11. Well, it's not really, actually. It's probably turned up to about 7. How's that? All good? Yeah. Just got a message from a friend. Her and her budgie are tuning in. Yippity too. Awesome. Awesome. Great. Hi, Heather. How you going? So this is my first Q&A online. I'm really excited. I'll probably just spend the whole time giggling, but I think that's okay too. Yeah, I'll just wait another minute or so. And so in the meantime, I've strategically placed all these beautiful images behind me, and they're all images that were made by Bettina Kaiser, who was the graphic designer and the illustrator of my book, SIARAD. So that's the cover. This is one of the original collages, but we didn't have a budget to kind of like put color in the book, so it's in black and white, and so that's the image over here. And they're all, Bettina was great to work with. That was a collage, the original collage at the back, which again, is in black and white in the book. Bettina was fantastic to work with. I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted by chat. Hey. Yeah, so the question is, will I be reading as well? Yeah, I will be reading. So I'll read. I'm going to be very instinctual about what to read today. I've got a bit of a plan, but like all good plans, I tend to throw them out when it comes to the time of actually executing the plan. So I'll be reading, but I'm really happy to take requests. If some of you have seen me read my stuff or perform my stuff before, I'm really happy to take requests. I'm not going to get up and like slam these poems. I'm going to adapt to the format and be much more kind of reading or reciting in my delivery, I guess. So yeah, my room is too small and I've packed myself into the tiniest corner, so I somehow kind of feel cozy and safe right here. Yeah, so these are the images, all of them inspired by the poetry. So Bettina, like I was saying, was fantastic to work with. I'm answering a question in my head. How was it like to work with a graphic designer, Caroline? Well, it was actually fantastic. And working with such a small publisher, I just felt such a part of the team. It was incredible. So there's a few people here, which is awesome. And I had one question. That's my dog in the background. Not much we can do about that either. There was one question by the wonderful Chiara Gabrielli, but I think that's a question about performance, so I might just leave that question for a little while. So if anyone has any questions to start off with about process or about the content of the book, why I chose to do poetry and prose in one collection, any kind of questions at all. If you're curious about anything, just pop it in the chat. And if you're still kind of thinking about that, then I'll read a poem. I've also got, because I teach a bit of creative writing, I've got some poetry prompts. Look, it's just going to be kind of like fun stuff. And then Jess from Underground Writers, I've asked her, when you do get into the zone and write a couple of lines of poetry, I've asked Jess to judge those poems, and there'll be a giveaway. So I'll be giving away a copy of the book for the best poem, not best, just what Jess kind of likes the best. And also I've got these poetry pods, which I'll talk about a bit later. And I'd like to kind of make one of those for one of the listeners as well, one of the viewers. Okay. Yeah, so there's a question. Can you tell us a bit about why you got into poetry and how you learnt to write it? Okay. All right, great question. Why I got into poetry depends how far back I should go. I have a really strong memory of writing a poem as a kid because I migrated with my family from Wales and Ireland to Australia. And I remember I must have been about 10 or 11. I think it was a school assignment, but I remember writing about this conflict about was I Australian or was I Welsh, and where I would end up living as an adult. And I think that must have kind of triggered something in me. My mum really liked it. And I guess, if your mum really likes something, you must go, when you're that age, you go, "Ooh, I must be really good at it." So I kept kind of writing a bit as a kid. And even as a teenager, I think I got rid of all of that sort of stuff. I had a really strong musical background from my mum. So I just think there was a lot of innate kind of rhythm stuff kind of going on. And then I didn't really write much poetry for a long time. I got into playwriting, but I was always drawn to the playwrights like Bertolt Brecht, Federico Garcia Lorca, even Bryony Lavery, Angela Carter. I was always drawn to the playwrights that had song and poetry in their plays as well. So are people born poets? I don't know, maybe. So I think there's a bit of that going on, bit of heritage. But also then back in 2013, a friend asked me to be the sacrificial poet in a slam that was being held in South Australia, and I was super nervous. I had the paper, I read off the paper, and so I wasn't really judged. I wasn't part of the competition. I was just kind of like the test poet. But it went really well. It went well. However, it took me another 3 years before I actually went and competed in a slam. So I think I come to things very slowly and very cautiously in life. And the only reason, even then, I think why I got into the slam was because I was doing a residency at the SIARAD Centre. And I saw the poster every single day. It was like in my face, slam heats. It was just there every single day when I went in. And I finally got the courage to enter. And that was 2016. And that first year, I made it into the state slam final. So have I answered the question? I'm a rambler. I start and then I end up somewhere far, far away. Yeah, and how I learned to write it, well, I mostly learnt to write it by reading it, and by, there's so much kind of slam poetry online now, so you can watch it as well. And also, I've really begun to listen to a lot. Just the other night I was listening to Richard Burton reading Dylan Thomas, and I shared it on my Facebook page, and a friend of mine just went, "Richard Burton should not read poetry." But I just heard this sort of sonic wave that I was writing, and he, even though he's a Welsh man and a Welsh speaker, reading Welsh poetry, still sounds quite English, but maybe there's something cultural there. So just listening to Richard Burton lying back on my bed, I was just going, oh my God, this is just fantastic. So I really get off on the audio, and the rhythms and the intonations of poetry. Okay. Lynette. Hi, Lynette. How are you going? What advice would you give a prose writer who thinks writing poetry is scary and unattainable, asking for a friend? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Well, I actually think that most prose writers write a bit of poetry anyway within their prose without even thinking about it, Lynette. I think that if you've written a metaphor or you've written a simile or you've compared something to something else, or when you're writing that's pinged off and made you think of something else, then I think that you're actually writing poetry anyway. I know a playwright, who's written kind of like monologues for single actors, and he's taken sections of that monologue and reformatted the work and called it poetry. And you read it and you wouldn't know necessarily that it's from theatre, that it's from a monologue. So I would say, why don't you, as a fun exercise, take one of your pieces of prose and just reformat the lines. Maybe look at the area where you've got some lyric. If you're a lyric kind of writer, then take some of that, or even take some of the dialogue and just play around with it and see what you can do with that. Also, I would say just pick up a book of modern poetry. I'm reading at the moment, well, I'm reading so much stuff at the moment because there's so much great poetry out there, but I'm reading at the moment, one of my favorites is Hera Lindsay Bird. Have a look at what she does. Who else? Ali Whitelock. She's published by Wakefield Press. Have a look at what she does, and you'll kind of see that, you can tell stories in poetry. I'm a bit of a storyteller in my poetry, so I would say just pick up a book of contemporary poetry, see what they're doing, copy what they're doing, but with your own words, but copy the intonations and the line endings and all that. Just have a bit of a play around. Play. Yeah. Okay. I hope that answers your question, Lynette. You can tell your friend now that to experiment and play. Okay. Joanne. Hi, Joe. Hi, Caroline. What inspires you? Oh, how long's a piece of string? There's a lot that inspires me. A lot of other writers inspire me. When I get really stuck for something, or I think I've got nothing to write about, I'll open any book, and particularly poetry book, and have a look at what that writer's doing and kind of ask, how does that subject matter, or that style of presenting a poem, how does that relate to my life? And because I think we all borrow stuff, don't we? Beg, borrow, steal. Everyone is influenced by other people. So firstly, I would go to other writers. If I get really stuck, I tell this to the people that I teach all the time, I just look out my window and kind of go, what's going on in the world right now? What's going on in my backyard? There's planes flying over. What's the sound of? Can I try and describe the sound of that bird? What's going on with the hills hoist? What could I use a hills hoist as a metaphor for? So that kind of thing inspires me. This book, SIARAD, it was written over, there are pieces in here going back 10 years or more. So the inspiration for those is really varied. Relationships in my life, family kind of inspired, all good, bad, and ugly, kind of inspired a lot of stuff. I was told a story about a guy who has penile cancer, and that as soon as I heard that story, I just thought it was almost gifted to me, that story, and that became Stars, the poem in there. So I think it's a matter of really listening, and I can tell when I'm in that. When I say listening, listening is looking and touching and tasting and smelling. It's all of that sensory stuff. I can tell when I'm getting ready to write something, because it's like my senses get heightened, you know. And I think everyone has different things that inspire them, but it's about being on the lookout, you know. And when you're in the middle of a work, like a street sign kind of inspired me. I was stuck with the poem Sister that I was writing. I've been trying to write a poem about that relationship for years. And then I saw this sign just down the road when I got off the bus. And the sign says, "Danger, fragile and brittle roof, use crawl boards." And I was like, oh, damn, that's it. That's the relationship, you know. And then I sort of did that classic thing of raced home, said hi to the dog, and like kind of tried you know, it was still took me some time to get that poem down and nailed and in a form that I was happy with. But sometimes it's just, you just got to be on the lookout, don't you? Yeah. Okay. Pam, hello. How are you? Do you write differently for poetry intended for slam competitions compared to poetry for print publication? Great question. Short answer, yes. I think that there's it's so complex, isn't it? There's so many things for slam competitions. I mean, first of all, it's the time, isn't it? So in Australia, it's a 2-minute, generally a 2-minute format. So that really sort of dictates immediately. It's a restriction, and restrictions are good. But I also find there's a bit of a flavour, and I've got to say, you know, the flavour, there's a lot of identity politics that I think goes on in slam competitions, particularly in Australia, but also, you know, I've watched stuff overseas and in America and stuff, and there is a lot of that. Yeah, the stuff that I get a bit bored with that, I've got to say. The stuff that I write, even for the slam comps, there's some personal stuff, but I like to write about different things. I actually get pretty bored writing about the same thing. And if I was writing about myself all the time, I find it really, I find that I start thinking about myself a lot. And there's so many more interesting things and people to write about that I just get a little bit bored. I know I've gone off the question, but yes, I do. So I was writing as well quite a lot targeted towards, you know, that 2-minute format. And then I've just found the last year or so that I just want to extend my narratives, because I tend to write narrative poetry. I try not to, and sometimes I write very small kind of lyrical things, but I do tend to be quite narrative driven in my poetry, and I guess I can be more rhythmic in the slam stuff. It's got there's more, like, I'm more aware of that it's going to be performative, and I think you can write really quiet poems that are performative, but I tend to I tend to want to be like, tell a story and be a bit bigger when I write the stuff that's in a slam style. Does that answer? Hopefully it does. Yeah, Kathy agrees. I'm not sure what she agrees about, the whole identity politics thing in slam stuff. Can be a bit like full on sometimes, and I got to say, there's also a lot of trauma that is being that is developed, that has come into, I think, the slam style stuff. And sometimes I actually find it like I've actually got to leave the room or turn the sound down because I do find it. I guess we're all fairly sensitive folk, aren't we, as poets? And I find it, it leaves me quite traumatized myself, I think. All right. Pam. Oh, hi, Paul. How you going? Pam says, I confess that I love seeing and hearing you perform your poetry, but not necessarily in a slam situation. Oh, thanks. Thanks, Pam. Yeah, because like To Touch and Taste a Comet, which is the first poem in the book, is certainly a lot longer than 2 minutes. And also in that poem, and also like in the Bob Dylan poem and in some others that I'm working on at the moment, I'm deliberately trying to weave a couple of narratives. So To Touch and Taste a Comet, I was thinking of quite a few things. I was thinking about how can I weave in saying goodbye to my 20s, which was actually like a couple of decades ago. But, I thought I'd stop thinking about that stuff when I hit my 50s, but you don't, because it's like you're in more than one place at one time. That's how time and writing works, right? You can be in more than one place. So I was thinking, how do I carry in me that person that was in my 20s, but also not be that person that I was when I was in my 20s? So weaving that, plus it's a poem about ambition and not letting go of ambition just because you hit your 50s, which seems to be, people kind of go, well, you've got to move over and let younger people come through. And you go, well, what if I only just like got brave when I was 49? So there's a kind of double. And then there's also this stuff with, like, as you know, my mum has dementia. And so I wanted to weave that in as well, because dementia is about remembering and forgetting and being in different times and spaces. So for me, I just could not do that in a 2-minute poem and in a kind of like slam competition. It just wasn't right. For me as well, those 2-minute poems, I can do one thing. I seem to be able to do one thing, or I can bring in a lot of imagery, but it'll be about, a guy with penile cancer, or it'll be about, the appalling kind of legislation around dementia and aged care in Australia, so it'll be about one thing, whereas I actually often I'm more interested in weaving a lot of other things through too. Is 2 minutes too restrictive? I think I probably just answered that, Joe. Oh, look, it's not too restrictive. I think any restriction is good for writing. I think, you got 2 minutes, you want to say something, like, it's good practice, and I also think it's good practice, just like making short films is good practice for somebody interested in making feature films. I think it's good practice to have those kind of restrictions. So no, I don't think it's too restrictive. It just depends what you want to do. Depends what you're interested in doing. Kathy, identity politics, yes. Also, writing about yourself gets so damn boring. Yeah. Look, I also think it's the necessary first step, to be honest. I think everybody does it. It's almost like that thing of, not always, but often novelists, the first novel that they write is about themselves, right? It's that, so it's not like, I get it. But I probably, after about 3 years now, getting into 4 years of competing in slams, I'm kind of going, is this, I just want to maybe spread the wings a bit further. But look, there's also there's poetry that is slam, right, which is the competition. But there's also performance poets or poets who perform. So there's someone like Sarah Kay, who is just writing the most extraordinary poetry. I also really love her because she's a storyteller. So I'm a bit like Caroline Reid, Sarah Kay. These are poets that are a lot younger than me that I think are doing incredible things and that I'm actually learning from. Again, getting braver to go, oh, you can actually reference, popular culture or stuff from your own life, not necessarily trauma, but you can write really interesting, complex poetry by what's going on in your own life. I've gone off again. There we go. Oh, Pam, yeah, I'm obsessed with To Touch and Taste a Comet, for those who are not aware. I think it's a popular one, which is great. I was so impressed with myself when I wrote that because I was trying to stretch myself, because I was trying to. It was the first poem, going back to that question, where I tried to do something more complex than write about just one thing. And so it was a bit of an experiment. It took a while, but it was a matter of just getting brave and trying it out and seeing a lot of trial and error, inspiration. So what inspired that was multiple things, all those things that I talked about. But the title and the comet that's in it, I was reading a copy of New Scientist. My partner pays 5 cents and gets all of the old copies from our local library, and they sit in the toilet. And so, you sit on the toilet and kind of flick through. And again, it's like when your ears and eyes are open to this stuff, you go, this is a great metaphor. This is fantastic, And I would do things like I would copy out the description of the comet and kind of go, how can I? And all of that is kind of like my thinking time, So I'll handwrite it because I love handwriting before I actually get to type stuff up. And I'll draw a picture of it and I'll make notes about the color of it in the magazine and all that kind of stuff. All the while, I think all the unconscious stuff is going on that I'm not even aware of. That's where trust comes in, I think. And yeah, so all of that kind of came together for that one, and it's so much fun to perform. It's a lot of fun to perform. Joe, write what you know. Yep. And also write what you're curious about. Write what you want to know more about too, I reckon. Because when you want to know more about something, that's when you go off and you do a bit of research as well. So I often, I don't go do major research. So I did a bit more research into comets when I wrote that one, but not like days and weeks, just kind of like, so I had this thing kind of hanging here, and then I also had this idea over here and this idea up here as well. So just so I kind of had a sense of, I knew what I was talking about. Yeah. So write what you know, but also write what you want to know more of. Yeah. Heather, do you have any particular habits when it comes to your writing practice, and what helps you stay motivated? Well, I'm not motivated 100% of the time. I have my fallow periods. Do I have any particular writing habits? Yeah. So over a decade ago, maybe, probably more than 15 years ago, someone gave me a book, or I found a book called The Artist's Way. And it's like a 12-week recovery program for creative people. I didn't do the whole book. I did maybe half of it. But one of the things that I loved with that book was she talked about morning pages. You have that book. Yeah, right. It's good, isn't it? And like most things, I took that book. I took what I needed from that book. I think. So I didn't finish it. I didn't finish the whole recovery program. So I don't know if I'm like a recovered creative or not. I don't know. Maybe a lapsed recovered creative. But one of the things that I kept was morning pages. So she talks about writing every morning 3 pages. So I don't have fancy journals. I have these books that I write in, and I usually buy them on special at Officeworks. And so I write. So this morning, but even that, look, I haven't been. If I'm super busy, I don't do it. But this morning I wrote about 4 of those because I was thinking about something and trying to work it out. And also it had been about 4 days before I'd written in the morning pages. And I find that if I go any longer than a week, I get really edgy. It's like it's a meditation. I'm not a good meditator, but I think writing is a form of meditation. I have a friend who is a dancer, and dancing is her meditation. So it's moving meditation, walking meditation, same thing. So that is that's my most consistent writing practice, but even that is inconsistent, right? Sometimes I use it if I'm banging around an idea, and that might go on for months, and then I'll have to read through it again. Sometimes I remember to highlight it and other times I don't. So I have to dig in the journals. This is why I'm so slow. I'm such a slow writer, really, compared to a lot of people. So I'll write ideas or lists, or like I said, if I'm working through something or if I'm researching something, I'll bang it down in there. So I think I've taken for granted just how much I use that. I write every day, but sometimes it might be, a list or a blog post or an email or even a text. Like, I kind of like taking time to write a text even, Can I say that in fewer words? So I suppose every time I write, this is such a good question, Heather. Every time I write, I'm conscious that I'm writing. I think that is part of my writing practice. And it's taken me a while to realize that not everyone likes writing, and B, kind of has that level of consciousness when they're writing. So, yeah. Does that answer? What helps me stay motivated? Other writers always get me motivated, and I love finding out about what other writers, who their influences are. So reading Lindsay Bird, I've got them all in a stack here because I get a bit excited, got me onto Frank O'Hara, and I all of a sudden realized, I haven't really delved into the Americans that much. And I read I've only got his lunch poems, which is such a small collection, but it just blew my tiny little mind, So other people's writing, what other writers are doing with words is probably my biggest motivator. Other artists, what they're capable of doing. And also, like, I get motivated when I read about women like Toni Morrison, who used to get up at 4 a.m, single mum, used to get up at 4 a.m. to write, and then had 2 kids, and then worked a job as well. And I mean, that's just a famous person writer, but there are a whole bunch of other artists that I know, whenever I kind of go, oh, it's poor me, or having such a hard time, or I can't possibly write because I need to sleep for 10 hours. I just kind of like often, even people like Kathy Parker here who has got kids and lives in the country and works and writes, and she's still finding time to do slams. Like I go, these people motivate me too, All right. Morning pages are so important and useful. Cool. Are you working on that's Paul. Yep, great. Are you working on a particular project right now? Yes. I'm working on the audio version of SIARAD. So I'm spending time with Joanne Baker at PBA FM in Salisbury, and I'm recording the stories. I'm going to be recording the longer stories in the studio, but then my partner and I, you've probably seen on Facebook, we built this sound booth, and I've got a nice little microphone. So I'm having a huge fun time discovering how to use GarageBand and playing around with some of the weirder poems in the book. So there's one called Colonization, and there's another one like Temporary People, this kind of shorter, more abstract, surreal kind of imagery. All of a sudden, when I've got 5 layers of voices going on in GarageBand, especially with Colonization, it's like, oh my God, it works so much better in that audio. Even though I love it on the page, I'm like, I wrote this for multiple voices. And that's where I just was, I think that's where all the theatre that I've done in the past, and writers like Sarah Kane, who died tragically young in the 90s, but there's a piece that she wrote, was it called, I can't remember, but several of her plays they're almost like voices coming out of the darkness. And I realized that that's almost what colonization is, and Temporary People, and even Murder Girl, that poem that's in there. They're these characters, and sometimes you write stuff and you don't even know what it is you're writing. I think those particular ones are much more suited to the audio. So I'm having huge fun playing around with making this book into audio. I'm super excited about that. And at the same time, I've also started thinking about this, and this is the first time I've ever thought like this, is what's my next collection going to be? I've never really thought like that before. So that's really interesting, how having a first collection has already, I'm bouncing onto what's the next one going to be? What's that going to look like? I'm thinking that it might be quite different to this one, because it's got a lot of personal stuff in it, I guess. It's almost the collection I needed to write to say I could write a collection. I mean, even the title, which means to speak or to talk, is almost about me getting my confidence to do that. It's almost like this is the process of me as writer and speaker getting my confidence. And so I'm really glad that I've had that thought of, what is the next collection going to be about and going to look like, and what style, and because if I hadn't done this, I wouldn't have even been thinking like that. I don't know what that project is yet, but it's great to just even have that thought. Lynette, 3 pages is so much. I've tried and failed so miserably. Oh, no, really? Okay, so you've just one of the best pieces of advice with that I was given was just writing out the thought which is, oh my God, I'm so crap at this. Other people can write 3 pages without any bother. And here I am, I'm really struggling to get shit, write shit for half a page until another word comes. Like, give yourself permission to just even write your thoughts and see what that is like, maybe. I don't know. Or if you're a typer, just cover up the screen. That's another really brilliant thing. Chuck a towel on the screen and just write. Giving yourself permission to write shit words is the best ever thing, because then everything goes, all the pressure goes. You're not writing for anyone else. You're not even writing for yourself. You're just writing, and it can be, it's almost like giving yourself permission to scribble as a painter, I think that we have so much pressure to write good or to make good art. And I think that without the shit stuff, we don't get ever to the good stuff. So I'll just give yourself permission to write shit for a whole fucking year, Lynette. Go for it. Kathy, totally inspired by your poems. Oh, thanks. Cool. Well, if you think that read this chick, man. She's great. Also read Ali Whitelock. I'm just going to plug a whole bunch of poets that I'm reading at the moment. If that's okay. Even this dude, man. Adelaide writer, Tom Sullivan. That's a very recent collection. We haven't talked about prose, have we? Yeah. Thrill Me, Lynette Washington, Glimmer Press. Great stuff in that. Ali Whitelock. So she's a lot of fun. All right. Really fun poet, but also like kind of sad and like breaks your heart as well. Rachel Mead, I've been reading Rachel's stuff, which is fantastic. David Stavanger, who is who's done performance stuff as well as page stuff, so he's really interesting. I'm just about to start on Ellen Van Nieven's Throat, which looks like a really fun collection. Like, she plays around a lot, experiments a lot. So, this one, Solid Air, there's got a lot of interesting stuff going on. And there is this sort of shift now. I think it's slowly happening that people are maybe thinking that just because people are good at performing their poems doesn't mean that they're not good at writing. There can still be a bit of snobbery and a bit of a divide, I think. I think there's shit poetry and good poetry on the page, and I think there's the same for performance. There's going to be good and bad stuff everywhere, right? Doesn't matter what form. All right. There you go, Lynette. I do 1 haiku instead of 3 pages worth a try, maybe. Yeah, of course, right? And that's the other thing. Give yourself permission to do 1 page. If 3's too much, just go 1 or something, Or maybe morning pages don't work for you, and that's totally fine as well. There's no, like, here I'm rambling on about that for me, but it works for me, and I write more if I'm trying to work something out. Nothing to do with anything for a story. I'm just trying to work through a problem, like, oh my God, now that there's been an incident with my mum in the nursing home, I've got to make a choice about putting her on a 3rd medication. And so I write through that kind of stuff, and I might be fucking bawling my eyes out on the page, but shit, I feel better afterwards. But for me, it's my thinking time. It's my like problem working out time. It's my getting my guilt and the weight of responsibility out onto the page time. So I use it in that way, and I'm sure Heather uses it differently. I'm sure Paul uses it differently, but don't ever feel like because one person has said, because I used to do this all the time, oh, that person that and especially if I admire what they do that, it must be great, it must work for me, it must work for everyone. And then I try it and I go, I'm shit at that, oh my God, I must be shit. But it's so not true, because we all have different things that we try that we're good at. Like, I'm trying to write a novel. I don't know when that's going to be finished, if ever, and I'm kind of coming to terms with that, sort of, that maybe I'm not a novelist. Maybe short form is my thing. Maybe audio is my thing. Maybe short films. Like, why do I feel like I need to write a novel, So I don't know. If it works for you, it works. If it doesn't, don't judge yourself. Just throw it away, I reckon. Okay. Write better. Get better sounds weird. Heather, I think I missed that. Heather, great advice. Oh, yeah, sometimes we just need to get out of our own way. Yeah, and it takes a while, doesn't it? Hard going. Yeah. Yeah, of course. Right. So, Lynette, you're a minimalist writer. And yeah. And of course, just writing reams and reams and reams is probably not going to work for you and be completely overwhelming. Joe, is structure important? Is structure important? For me, yes, but not right at the start. It comes later. So that's the way that I work. I actually realized I was going to have all these sort of writing like competitions and giveaways and things. So while you're sitting there, I am going to answer that question, but while you're sitting there, and if a little 3 or 4 line love poem comes your way in your mind, just write it in the chat, because I'd actually love to give away, and Jess is going to give away a copy of the book. So, again, like Minimalist Writers, 3 line love poem, go. So we've got about 15 minutes left, and then Jess will just choose one and we can send you out a copy. All right. Is structure important? So, yes, I think structure is important, but for me, not at the start. It's at the start, I'm just getting ideas down. I think there are people that have a clear idea. They write like that. And I think it's the same for novelists. They plot everything and plan everything, and they got their structure. And other people, and I'm very much like this, is I think they get called pantsers in the or quilters in the novel world. So I just get all my ideas down and have a look at it all and kind of see what's missing and see what the shape of it is. And this takes quite a few going to it, multiple drafts, and then it seems to find its own structure. And then there's that thing of, okay, well, if I'm going to mention that at the end, then I need to somehow find a way of suggesting that at the start. The imagery somehow needs to talk to each other, or if it doesn't, that needs to be a deliberate choice. So yeah, for me, structure is important, but it's not the first thing. Having said that, the next poem I write, I'll probably go, I'm going to write a poem. Well, I mean, yeah. So that's the way that I work anyway. Solid air. Yep. Alicia loves solid air. Hi, Alicia. And Heather's a short form kind of person too. Yeah, totally get it. Are you trying to write a novel, Heather, or no? You're more your poetry person, aren't you? How's the PhD going? Or shouldn't I ask? Paul, I'm reading your book, Kathy's book. Oh, yeah, Spinning Teeth I've got here as well, which is another fantastic book for young women from Adelaide doing performance stuff, Paroxysm Press. Like, these small indie publishers there's just no budget at all to do any promotion, which is why it's so great having an organisation like Underground Writers who are willing to do a Q&A for your more kind of like indie writers, I guess. It's just so wonderful having another organisation that you can sort of tap into and be hosting this. It's fantastic. So Heather's got a poem. worrying at this love like a chipped tooth, filing down the rough edges with honey kisses, learning patience from your quiet touch. Aww, it's beautiful. I feel like that's a really good cue for a poem. Shall I read a poem? I feel like I've been talking a lot, so maybe if I can just go into the quiet poem space for a minute, and you can either listen or write your own love poem, or there's also a poem in here called Lonely. If you want to write a poem about lonely, not about lonely, but a poem titled Lonely, that's good too. So my lonely poem, I'll read it for you. It's very short. Lonely. There is nothing as lonely as a single bunch of daffodils, discounted in a blue bucket, drooping next to the Chupa Chups on the dirty glass counter of the North Lakes Plaza smoke shop. So that was a poem that I wrote when I lived in Darwin. North Lakes Plaza was our local shopping centre. And also for added layers, the daffodil is the flower of Wales. And so I think that has for me, another level of meaning to it, particularly now that, my mum is fading into somewhere else, who knows where. And so, I think that place she's fading to has potential to be a very lonely place as well at times. So that's also another added layer into that poem. Okay, Alicia. Sun-stretched teas and tea-flavoured mouth memories curve around my stretched belly and beating heart, holding all the space I need. These are gorgeous, everyone. I don't know how Jess is going to choose, but she will. Pam, I'm at home without you, too tired today to shower and dress and smile at nurses. I will still love you tomorrow. Aww. Hi, Kathy. Thank you. Thanks for coming. And Paul as well. Oh, yeah. So these Kathy and Paul are both doing open mics and slam. Paul's doing a slam in New Zealand. Amazing, isn't it? Incredible. So I hope you all don't mind if I read. Hope y'all don't mind if I read another poem. Just give my little brain a break from the questions. Thank you so much for coming, Kathy and Paul. It's awesome. All right. Does anyone have a request, or if you've got a request? Otherwise, I'll do To Touch and Taste a comment. Okay, here we go. To touch and taste a comet. At 6:05 on a milky morning in November, naked from the waist down, dripping perimenopausal sweat into my first black coffee of the day, I wrote, "Be who you want to become, but first know who you want to become." Jesus fucking Christ. I hate it when I channel Gandhi at the crack of dawn. The grainy, difficult dream in which I am trying to fuck Atticus, a lover who left 24 years ago, still prowling my mind like a starving shark. I want to become Tyler Durden without the mental illness, but the only club I belong to is the one parent dead, the other has dementia club. But I am trying to become ambitious, and so I read a story in a back issue of New Scientist, To Touch and Taste a Comet. And I'm so underwhelmed by the picture of Comet 67P's bulbous shape marked in cheap primary colours where sunlight falls or not, that I could never guess. Comet 67P is a wildly alien landscape with only a few spots safe for landing. And I think, Jesus fucking Christ, there's a metaphor for life. Well, the world is a kind of nothing place, and I am like a rubbish pile inside, and yet to touch and taste a comet is written in font more bewildering and elegant than any comet. It makes me feel something I have no language for, that may be out of my reach forever. I'm trying to become brave and write good poetry, which means I must write Jesus fucking Christ and Atticus 3 times in this poem, because 3 is the number of betrayal. Atticus, oh Atticus, who gave me a garlic press when you left back in 94. Made in Switzerland, she has 40 holes where the flesh worms out in a pleasing way. You held her higher than a trophy and said, this garlic press, it's a metaphor. While I hid behind cheap red wine, not knowing what the garlic press was a metaphor for, and feeling too scared, sad, bored, stupid to ask. You see, I imagined my intelligence as tooth-sized back then, shrinking to flea-sized in the sober days, with the surface as fragile as fresh, fallen dandruff. Some days, the garlic press reminds me of a speculum. Reminds me how careless we were back then, how you lost your mother as sudden as a gunshot, how 7 years later my father went, twin towers fallen, how that house with its glimpse of the dirty river from the enormous red-bellied bathroom, that house got demolished, but the garlic press, she's lasted. Sure, her hinge is a little loose, but she remains what she is without striving to become something else. In the end, I want to be truthful, useful, kind. But ending is always the difficult part, because fucking is not a metaphor, and we were always somewhere in between, Atticus and I. His name always too much on my tongue, our pain always too much in my belly, which is almost definitely a metaphor, but some days, well, I don't know. Like my mother, I would like to be forgetful, but my dreams won't let me. I want to touch and taste the comet. All right, so that's to touch and taste a comet. And I think I will actually now answer the question that Kiara asked while I remember, which is a question about performance. Let me have a look. So Kiara asked, she said, your performance style is incredibly different to what is the more confidential spoken word physicality. Is that a conscious choice? And if no, how did your performance style come about? Okay, so I think that most of the people here have seen me perform, and I tend to move around a fair bit, but not always, right? So I think that came about from just being moved by the rhythm of the words, which is what I talked about earlier. The rhythm of the words and just the motion of the poem itself. So I couldn't help but move, you know. Was it a conscious choice? So yes, then I had an awareness that that's what I was doing, and that sometimes it worked and other times I was doing it just because I was a nervous performer. And I've been around actors long enough to know that, you know, rule number 1 is have your feet firmly planted on the ground. So I broke rule number one, but I deliberately broke it because sometimes there's a couple of poems that I really need to pace. I really need to move around, but I didn't want my movement to be so choreographed that I knew that on this line my arm was going to go there, on this line I was going to do that, or I was going to do that. I spent some time with a friend of mine in Perth when I was preparing the poem Lost, and I really loved, because I used to sign a fair bit. I worked with deaf kids back in nearly 20 years ago or more. And I thought, that would be great to introduce some signing to that. So we spent a couple of afternoons together, and we worked out really how to interpret that poem in terms of Auslan and signing and spatially, And in the end, I let all of it go. It was a part of the process that I went through, that my body physically sort of went through. And now when I perform that poem, I don't move very much at all. But I needed to go through the process of testing it out to know that it's actually performatively a fairly quiet poem. I do this a lot. I move my arms a lot, so I'm doing it now even when I talk, I think. So I think each poem has its own, lives inside my particular body in a particular way. And sometimes that can change depending on my mood as well, I think. So I also think the performance style came about from, again, I come from a theatre background. I've written plays, and I love actors. I love being around actors. And I programmed for 3 years in Adelaide, Adelaide actors reading contemporary Australian fiction. And so I was in the luxurious position of being able to watch these wonderful actors on stage reading stories. And, you take notice of what those actors are doing and what they're not doing. And, there were some that really physicalized, and that worked well for a particular style of story, especially if there was a really strong single voice character in that story. Whereas really still, quiet reads worked really well as well for other stories. So you got to take what works for a particular poem. Yeah, good question. Good question, Kiara. Makes you think. Okay, how are we going for time, Jess? And have you chosen? I've got 4:30. But is there any other questions or any other comments, or if Jess wants to choose one of those poems? That's why, Jess, I asked you to do it, because I didn't want to have to choose. So maybe, if we've got 3 poems, let me know what we've got, because if we've got 3 poems, Jess, I'm really happy to send copies of the book out to 2 people. So folks will need your yeah, look, 3 poems. So I reckon what we'll do is let's get email addresses of those 3 people, and just the fact that you went to the effort, I reckon I'll send out a copy of the book to 2, and then for one of them, I'm going to, Pam already has a copy of the book. That's cool. I think Alicia does as well. But you know what? You can give it away as a present. That's fine. I don't mind. But I would like to choose one of them, and maybe I can just choose Heather, because Heather was the first one. I'd really love to make you a poetry pod. So these are my poetry pods. If you're good, if this is a good choice for Heather. So what I do is I take the poem and I write it out, and then I burn the poem, collect the ashes, and then I usually add some kind of object. So this one has knuckle bones in it. And then I've got a whole lot of yarn and materials and stuff like that. And I just choose very intuitively and stitch and bind and create these little pods. So I'll do that one for Heather, and then Alicia and Pam, all three of you, if you could put your email addresses in there, and then Jess will email you, or I will email you, or we'll work it out, and then we'll get your home addresses and we can send them out as well. Okay. I think that is everything. I didn't read a story, I feel bad because poetry got talked about a lot. So maybe I can just read a tiny little prose poem or something like that. Would that be okay? I know we're going over time. Yeah, okay. So Jess, great suggestion. If you don't want to make them public, then send your email address to Jess and we'll sort it out from there. Okay, I'm just going to read to finish One Blue Eye. Okay. This is another piece that I wrote in the Northern Territory. The dog at the BP in Fitzroy Crossing had one blue eye, a torn ear, and a mind opened by the wound in the top of her head. Even Dave looked twice, and it takes a lot for Dave to react. On the dry grass verge behind the dog, a blue heeler waited, uncertain of the outcome of the fight. Had he been won or not? And if so, why was she stalling? Balls twitching, lipstick out, he sniffed the air for a clue. The dog didn't move. A slow parade of muddy four-wheel drives and camper vans steered clear of her. Grown-ups and children rubbernecked to gawp at the dried blood dress, the one blue eye, the 10-mile stare, the meaty crown. But she wasn't moving. Tough bitch, said Dave. You want a coffee? He parked away from the dog, giving her a wide berth on his trek to the roadhouse, just like everyone else. Her circle of stillness was sacred. Her place had teeth. She wasn't about to lick her wounds in public. One Blue Eye. Thanks, everyone. You rock the house for turning up. Thank you so much for making this so much fun and asking a heap of really good questions. I've really, really enjoyed myself. I hope you have too. How do you end? Endings are always hard because fucking is not a metaphor. Thank you, Pam. Thanks, Alicia. Love your work too. Claire, was that you? Claire O'Neill, you're a champion for turning up. So good to have you here. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Jess, for doing all that. We'll be in touch and I'll get the addresses from all of you. Thanks, Heather. And thank you to everyone else that might have just been lurking in the background. Appreciate it. I'm going to sign off now. Say goodbye. Enjoy your lovely Sunday evening with your family or on your own or with your dog or whatever you're doing. Have a wonderful time. Bye.